Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for this Learning Specialist panel about prepared young professionals. As you all see, there is a chat feature at the bottom of this webinar, so please feel free to type any questions that you have for the panelists in this area. We do have a designated Q&A time at the end of the panel, so we will definitely address those and take turns asking them once we get to that. All right, so without further ado, we're going to go ahead and start to introduce ourselves. My name is Kelly Catanacci, and I am the Director of Learning Services at the University of Florida, and I am one of your moderators today.
Hello, I'm Chelsea Yost. I'm a Learning Specialist, and I'm at the University of Florida. And now our panelists will go ahead and introduce themselves. Taylor.
Hi, everybody. My name is Taylor Thomas, and I am a learning specialist at Penn State.
Hello, everyone. My name is Erin Bennett, and I'm a learning specialist at the University of Florida. You got the whole gang here today.
Hey, everyone. My name is Tyler Parmenter. I'm the Learning Services Coordinator at Vanderbilt University.
Hi, guys. I'm Katie Johnson. I'm a senior learning specialist at the University of Missouri.
All right, we are going to go ahead and jump into our first set of questions for our panelists. Our first set of questions for the panelists this afternoon is going to be focused on preparation before a conference while you're still back in your jobs at your institutions. So starting with you, Taylor, in the past, when you were planning for going to M4A, what information were you looking at on the convention website, and how did you use that to help you?
So besides networking, the N4A convention is to learn and grow as a professional, first and foremost. So this means actually attending concurrent sessions. So once the agenda comes out, I usually print it, grab a highlighter and a pen, and I always look at every single session to try and figure out what I might want to attend. So first I'll go through and look at the title and the description for all the current concurrent sessions for each day of the conference. Then I'll go back to see if I have any sessions marked off that are at the same time. And then if this happens, I usually reread the description and then look at what track it's classified as. For the convention, N4A makes presenters pick a category that they think their presentation fits best in. So that can be really helpful when trying to figure out what to go to. And then I also look at the presenters to see if there's anyone presenting I may want to connect with or hear from. Since I do this so early, I usually put that aside until the app comes out closer to the actual conference dates. They usually have an app that has the agenda where you can build your own schedules. So I'll go back to my sheet and kind of go through that same process and then build my agenda on the app so I'm ready to go when convention actually comes around. And I think it's best to do this early because you definitely feel more prepared going in. But if I'm still stuck between a few sessions, then I usually wait till the day of to decide or see if there's anyone else I know that's going to the same session.
Taylor, thank you for sharing that. As I know, when we get the list of sessions, it always seems like a lot of information and you're trying to figure out making sure you're not missing the best one, but also going to something that'll interest you and benefit you in your role. Katie, what material over to you do you feel like is the most important to bring with you to a convention, and what would you leave at home?
So I think some of the biggest things that I made sure I took, especially my first convention, was a good amount of copies of your own personal resumes. Honestly, you guys pass those out like candy, especially if you meet someone and you're networking. Another thing that's really helpful to have are business cards. I know my first convention that I went to, obviously I was an intern, so I didn't have like crazy business cards, but I personally went and had some made, just like super generic, that had my name, maybe what I was aspiring to do, and then just my personal email address, just because I knew my part-time position at the time obviously wasn't going to take forever, and that email probably wasn't going to last forever. So I made sure to emphasize that personal email so they could contact me potentially after the convention. In addition to those two things, obviously that's like on the networking side of thing, which is super helpful. But honestly, like think about like your outfits or what you choose to wear to convention. They're super long days. You're going to be waking up early in the morning. You're going to attend sessions all day. You might not necessarily get to change before maybe a night out or a social gathering to kind of further network. I know personally, I cannot walk in heels to save my life. So if you struggle to do that, maybe try and pack some comfortable shoes, honestly, because you want to be comfortable. Obviously, you want to be professional and carry yourself in a professional manner. But if you're not comfortable, it's going to be noticed by others. So I think it's super important to kind of have those materials for your networking, but also have those materials like a nice outfit to kind of pair with those so you feel comfortable and confident throughout the day.
Katie, thank you for sharing that. I know I wish I would have heard that for our first conference that we went to. I think we missed the part that there was no like break to change and refresh yourself. So definitely dressing and preparing for a full day's worth of networking and activities is good to hear from a veteran such as yourself. Erin, a question for you. Should both new and returning conference attendees prepare an elevator pitch into the conference? What is the value of doing that?
Yeah, I think having an elevator pitch in your back pocket at all times is critical. You want to be able to introduce yourself, your role, and potentially even your goals concisely to the people that you meet there. Elevator pitches are valuable because they show you're confident and then also that you've prepared ahead of time. They can also make you memorable, especially if you're on the job market or might be on the job market soon, or you're trying to solidify connections with somebody in the field. I think there's also value in having multiple pitches prepared. For instance, when somebody asks about your program or like the services that you offer within your program, are you prepared to answer that? If not, it might be time to kind of sit down and think about your own personal pitch, but also how you can talk about your program. Again, it's just going to make you even more memorable.
Thank you, Erin. I think you really hit home with the importance of an elevator pitch, also now rebranded as a speech, a peach and a speech. I know so many of our young professionals are wanting to know how to stand out since there's so many of them at a conference. And I think a good impression can easily come with that elevator pitch. So thank you for walking them through that. Now that we've heard from our panelists regarding those initial thoughts on preparing to go to the convention, Kelly, I'm going to turn it over to you to have our panelists share more about how to make the most of the convention once you're actually there.
Awesome. Thanks, Chelsea. Yeah, so attending a convention is really exciting, but it can also be a bit nerve-wracking. So Tyler, can you take us back to the first time that you attended N4A? What are some things that you enjoyed and what are some things you wish you could have done differently?
Sure. So the first time I attended N4A, I was fortunate enough to have participated in the Professional Development Institute prior to convention. And so I was able to develop some relationship with some peers going into convention, because when you're sort of in those big, large settings, kind of the networking and can be overwhelming at times. So kind of having that group that you can sort of interact with that's not from your own school, I think is really unique. So if you're able to get involved with N4A organizations going into that, or utilizing sort of the new member orientation or the community service project to kind of develop those relationships early on and sort of see some peers and those sorts of things that you can get better acquainted with throughout the next few days of convention. I think the thing I wish I would have done better, or something I would have changed, is perhaps just attending some more concurrent workshops and looking at from a more holistic perspective. At that time, I was very much still learning the role of what it was to be a learning specialist and those sorts of things. But I wish at the time I would have gone back and reflected and had an opportunity to attend some different sessions or some different groups and those sorts of things.
Thanks for sharing. And you made a really good point about identifying a core group of individuals to interact with in a large setting, such as N4A. So Katie, over to you. If you're a young professional attending a conference like N4A and you do not have any previous connections, what are some ways that you would encourage first-timers to network and to meet new people?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that I know I took advantage of, and it was super beneficial to me, was attending that new member orientation that Tyler just mentioned. Honestly, they kind of throw you in there with all new young professionals that kind of no one really knows anyone. So you're kind of all on that same level where that obviously it's scary going into the atmosphere, but if you know that everyone else is kind of in that same position that you are, it makes it a little bit more easier to go up and introduce yourself. I remember like people that sat at my table from new member orientation when I attended, I think 5 years ago, and like those connections that you make, they kind of become like your buddy, even though they're not necessarily from your institution that you're at. But there's like a way for you to network with them, kind of get closer to someone that's also in the same position as you. You can introduce them to people that you know, and then they can introduce you to people that they know. So it kind of just almost doubles your network within like a short amount of time, which is super helpful. And I think also too, whenever you're attending sessions or if you are interested in joining a committee, I think sitting by people that you don't know is super important. I know a lot of times you'll be like, oh, I know this person, I'm gonna go sit with them. But in reality, I think it's super beneficial for you as a professional to sit by someone that you don't know, or maybe someone that you've seen before on social media that you're like, ooh, I want to get to know them, and kind of step out of your comfort zone and be like, hi, like I'm so-and-so, like, why are you at this session? I think it's just an easy way to kind of throw yourself out there again, jumping out of that comfort zone and just kind of seeing where you're at in relation to other people. Because honestly, attending convention, the network piece is going to be a component of it. It just depends on how extreme you want to make it. So.
Yeah, Katie, it sounds like you're reminding us that you're going to get out what you put in. And if you do step outside of that comfort zone, then you can have the opportunity to make some really meaningful connections. Erin, from your perspective, how should young professionals approach the social aspect of the conference, such as happy hours or luncheons? What has your experience been with those, and also with any free time at conventions?
Yeah, I think anytime you're at a conference, it's important to take advantage of as many opportunities as you can, especially the more social events. So happy hours, luncheons, meetups with specific groups, and other social aspects are going to give you a better opportunity to be more candid and potentially make deeper connections with the people in your field. It also gives you the chance to meet people who are in similar roles, for instance, other young professionals. I feel like it's really important to also connect with people who are kind of on the same level as you. You never know what they can also bring to the table, and you can also talk about the experiences that you've had. So don't underestimate the value of that. And even though these events may be more casual, you also need to remember that you're still representing your personal brand and your institution. So even if it's free time, you're still seeing people that you may have connected with, or you might already know. So continue to dress and act appropriately, be intentional with the connections you're making, and also use that space as a time to follow up just a little less formally with other people that you've made connections with. And then something else I wanted to point out is that it's okay to use your free time to recharge. Obviously, there's events that you're really excited to attend, and you want to come to those with as much energy as possible. So don't overdo it to the point that you're showing up to those things you're excited about and don't have the energy to really pay attention or get out of it what you would hope to get out of it.
Yeah, thanks for reminding us about taking time to rest and recharge, but then also maintaining your own personal brand when you're at this convention. Taylor, what advice do you have for what to do in a session and how to engage?
Sure. So I am a writing, handheld, very kinesthetic person. So I'm always having notebooks I'm to write with. If you have, an iPad or whatever, anything that you could take notes on in the session, because that's the whole point of you going, is to remember what was discussed. And then also keep in mind that some sessions are interactive. So if presenters do ask for participate if you feel comfortable, even if it's just raising your hand, if they do a poll, making eye contact, asking a question. I also try to get there 5 minutes early or so. Some sessions can be super packed or standing room only. So it's nice to get a seat and introduce yourself to those around you, like Katie mentioned earlier, that networking and making those connections. And then at the end of the session, make sure you thank the presenters, especially if you went to that session specifically to see certain presenters or you want to build a connection with certain people. Go up, introduce yourself, say that elevator speech, tell them what you got out of it, refer back to your notes. It's a perfect time to exchange those business cards, resumes, and then follow up later. And then also make sure you wear layers, bring a sweater or jacket. It can be freezing in those rooms and also extremely hot, so layers are key.
Amen to that, Taylor. I remember many a chilly convention. There really is so much, you've all highlighted this, so much to get out of the convention itself, but there are just as many valuable opportunities once the convention's over.
Kelly, you bring up such a good point of transitioning into post-convention connections. Tyler, we're going to start with you on how you continued connections that you established at N4A once the convention is over.
Sure. So one of the ways I sort of continued on with those connections I made at convention was getting involved with Learning Concerns Enhancement Committee. So N4A has numerous subcommittees, and so the opportunity to get involved in those is super duper helpful because you're still interacting with the same peers Then also reaching out to just people you met at conference. There's always a group chat that seems to get started at a conference and those sorts of things, and just following up with your peers in that space. Just lots of different options, bouncing ideas off of one another, attending support summits like this, participating in these sorts of things is a great way, because you'll start to see familiar faces, develop those relationships, set up informational interviews, set up Zoom phone calls, all of those different things that can help you to develop a relationship, not only professionally, but also personally, which then helps you grow further in those sorts of things.
Thanks, Tyler. I think we all love a good selfless LCEC pitch. So if anybody is interested and wants to be part of that, feel free to message any of us after that. Erin, over to you. So let's say you learned something really cool at the convention that you want to share with your colleagues back at your institution. How would you go about doing that?
Yeah, so there's a variety of ways that you can share what you've learned, and I feel like that ranges from very informal to very formal. I always personally appreciate when my colleagues share their notes on different presentations that they found meaningful, especially if I can't attend the conference myself. I kind of have to live vicariously through them. So a lot of times they will upload their notes onto Google Docs, and then that way it's easy for me to access, but also to send it out to different parties who are interested in seeing them. You can also give a recap to your team if you have scheduled meetings that allow for it. So we personally have a learning services meeting every week. So that's a place that I would share that. But also if you think whatever you learned is relevant to the whole team, you could always present that information at a staff meeting as well. So I think you can do a discussion, you could do a presentation. But yeah, I feel like we're all learners here, so we're all kind of excited to hear what our colleagues have learned. So definitely take the time to re-educate your team once you get back.
Thank you, Erin, for giving all those attending N4A an action item upon returning is to share everything they learned. I know, especially for young professionals who are looking for more leadership opportunities, maybe back at their school, coming back from N4A and offering to present or to share something is a great way of doing that and initiating that on your own. Katie, over to you. Following a convention, you can feel refreshed and rejuvenated. Sometimes we find ourselves going back to our respective schools, wanting to change the world and bring everything we learned with us. What is your advice for balancing the excitement of new things and what's realistic and feasible?
Definitely. So obviously attending convention, you're going to get all these great ideas, all from different institutions, both small and large. Kind of get a better idea of ooh, this sounds cool, or ooh, I think we should really do that. Obviously as a young professional, you're kind of maybe a little timid to share those ideas. But I also think it's super important to, if you are willing to share, is to kind of be a little bit more realistic. Some institutions in terms of their resources are limited, so you don't want to pitch a big idea that you think would be really cool for your department if the department doesn't necessarily have the resources to kind of accommodate a change. Or if there is maybe a bigger change, think of maybe some steps that you could go to maybe your supervisor and be like, ooh, I learned about this. I know we can't change it overnight, but maybe we can do X, Y, and Z to kind of get to that big change later on down the road. I think it's super important to kind of understand where your institution stands in terms of resources in their kind of their mindset on making big changes, because you don't want to be that person that wants to go in and change every little thing, because then it just doesn't come off the right way. So you want to be respectful of maybe the practices that your institution has in place, but also make suggestions for those small minor changes. And then obviously too, as a young professional, maybe as a graduate assistant or an intern, you might not be at your forever school. So keep those ideas, write those ideas down, take them to your next institution where the resources might be unlimited, or they might be open to making those bigger changes. It doesn't necessarily have to go towards the school that you're at the moment, but you can kind of keep those in mind, especially if it's something that you really could help with, or it's something that you are really interested in. You can kind of introduce it to maybe a future school or a school down the road, something that you really got a lot out of during the convention.
Katie, I think your advice is so important on sometimes what you learn at N4A may not be the right fit for the school that you are at, but definitely to keep it in your toolkit and to use it when it's either available to apply or if you're at a new school and innovation is needed. I think having that all in your back pocket is always a good idea. This is going to be the end of our formal questions for our panelists, and so we are going to switch over to questions at this time. We want to first thank you all for sharing your insight and your wealth of knowledge on the process of attending a convention, which I know will be of help for everyone who plans to attend the upcoming N4A convention in person this summer in Vegas, which everyone on this call, whether at Vegas or still back at their respective schools, will be a help to everyone. So please feel free to reach out. During this time, if you could please put your questions, if you have any, in the Q&A box, and Kelly and I will help read your questions and have our panelists answer them.
Yeah, and as some of those questions are coming in, I just want to pause and take a moment to have the panelists indicate if they are going to be at the N4A convention this year in Las Vegas. That way you will automatically have some people that you can recognize and go to and make those connections that we've been talking about. So just by show of hand, panelists, who's going to be able to make it to Vegas this year? All right, we got Taylor going, we got Tyler, Katie is hoping to be there too. So yeah. Lots of good representation. All right, so again, please throw those questions in the chat, but I do have one to get us started, and I'd love to get both a male perspective and a female perspective, please. So Tyler, you're definitely on board. And then any of the other ladies, please feel free to jump in, but there's a question about how to dress and make sure that you're packing for a warm weather climate, like this year is Vegas, while also being professionally dressed, especially since you may not have a whole lot of time to change during the day. And then there's also the Arctic tundra of the conference room. So what is your advice?
I'll go first. Like I said before, make sure you dress in layers. Obviously you're not going to show up to a conference in like a crop top and shorts, like that's definitely a negative. But even just like a nice like summer dress that you would wear to work, or even like a tank top with, not a tank top, but like a sleeveless top, like nice blouse with a like cardigan, because it will be hot outside, but then again, like those conference rooms can be super chilly, and you know, like ankle pants or like a nice skirt, but anything you would usually wear to work, but just making sure you have those layers, I think would be fine.
I'll also chime in real quick. So another thing that is easy to wear is like a school polo. So something that represents the school that you work at. I know at UF, we have a lot of those like sleeveless polos. That might be because it's so hot here all the time. But if your school has that, maybe pick one up, or a short sleeve polo definitely works. And then, as we've all said, layers, throw a cardigan over that so you're not super chilly during the presentations.
Yeah, and I would echo the layers point. Aaron's point with the polo is a great idea, whether that's a pullover, quarter zip, all of those different things. Layers are always great. And then if you've got a polo underneath or something like that, when you do go outside, because those conference rooms will be rather chilly. So definitely recommend layers.
All right, Taylor, I'm going to follow up to something that you had said earlier in the presentation. You talked about thanking the presenter after the fact and potentially going up and introducing yourself. I know for some people that sounds really like anxiety provoking, especially if you're a young professional and you don't have that full-time position yet. So what advice do you have for somebody to kind of empower them to go and make that connection after a presentation?
That's a great question. I'm definitely someone that is super nervous and like has some anxiety approaching new people, but just think this may be your one chance to connect with that person. There are hundreds and hundreds of people at this conference. The place is huge, and this year we're in Vegas, so people are going to be all over the place. So just remind yourself, this could be my one chance to talk to this one person who I really admire, look up to, or want to connect with, to really like push yourself out of your comfort zone. Even if you just say, hi, loved your presentation, would love to connect later, leave your business card on the table, just something as simple as that, and then taking their business cards, because usually presenters will have theirs out on the table or with them. But just a quick, hi, loved your presentation, would love to connect. Even that, if that's all you do, that's more than nothing. So that's all I would say.
That's great advice. And Aaron, if I can call on you, I know you've presented at an N4A conference before, along with a couple other panelists, but what was your perspective as a presenter? Did you mind when people came up and asked you questions after the fact?
No, I mean, it was definitely really cool to have that much excitement around the presentation. So I think most presenters are going to think that it's awesome that you're coming up to talk to them. It feels really worthwhile because you can see that people are interested and engaged. People who are presenting are expecting those to like come up to them after. So this is the perfect time to really like reach out to them and make that connection. I also think something that's helpful is to give yourself some action items of like, I want to meet at least 2 presenters, or I want to meet at least 2 presenters and 2 other young professionals, and then have some kind of like accountability partner on that so that you're held to it. And then you're going to be really proud of yourself after, and you're also additionally going to make those great connections.
I have a question for the group who, since all of us have been to M4A as young professionals and then veterans as well. If you're a young professional going to M4A and you are back to that state that Kelly just talked about, where it is very nerve-wracking to go, especially this year, if you're going out by yourself, maybe as a young professional, is it okay to either ask your boss or a mentor or a mentee to help you get introduced to people that maybe you don't feel 100% comfortable doing on your own, but having someone kind of know that you need some help in that? If anyone's had any experience with that.
I can touch on, I remember my first convention, I was an intern at Maryland at the time, and they all knew that obviously I was actively looking for a job, so they had no problem, like they were like finding me and like dragging me across socials, be like, here's so-and-so, blah, 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 and then they would like kind of leave. I had that conversation going in saying, I'm not the best at like stepping out of my comfort zone to like meet new people, especially in an environment like that. So I was super open with my like coworkers or supervisors at the time. And I was like, I want to meet anyone and everyone. So I was super willing to do it. I just kind of needed that extra push. So when we would be like walking around or attending sessions, if I saw someone that I had worked with at Maryland, they were kind of just like pulling me each way and kind of getting to know or introducing me to other people, which I kind of took advantage of. And then once I kind of got that comfort level after meeting to so many people, then I felt a little bit more better to do it on my own, but they kind of helped me kind of get started with that process, especially that first day. That big first like welcoming social that they did, it kind of really opened my eyes, like, okay, I can do this. I can introduce myself to strangers. I just needed that extra push, and then I felt a lot more comfortable.
Thank you, Katie.
I do have another question for the group. What's everyone's take on, if there's a presentation and there's some really excellent materials that are demonstrated either on a slideshow or something like that? What's appropriate to do? Are you able to ask for a copy of those materials? Is it okay to take a picture? What's everyone's thoughts?
I always take pics. Usually, or sometimes the presenters will say that, the slides will be available or pause to take pictures. So definitely take pictures. Sometimes I'm not fast enough writing my notes down, so just having that snapshot is really helpful. Also, if you really want those slides and they don't say that it'll be available or it's not going to be on the app, you can always go up and ask afterwards, but definitely get the material that you want. And if you don't get it, make sure you ask for it later.
I'll add a little bit to that. I think if you are going to ask somebody for their presentation because it's not going to be posted anywhere, maybe offer to have some kind of like exchange of information or sit down with them and have a conversation first, just so that it feels a little bit like a little more mutual and you guys can get to know each other and network a little bit first as well.
All right, we had another really good question pop up in the Q&A. Camille asked, what tips do you have for young professionals who may have impromptu interviews for a job during the conference? So I can see probably 2 sides of that, of how to manage that professionally while you're also probably went there thinking you'd be in a session, and then just that interview in itself. So if anyone on the panel has any insight or how they would advise somebody on that, that would be great to hear.
I think that's going to be a little bit of an not unsettling situation, but a little bit of an impromptu situation. I think just take a deep breath and just sort of present your personality as best you can in that space. At the end of the day, a lot of times interviews are more about personality and fit and those sorts of things, as opposed to necessarily your knowledge base. And you can sort of demonstrate your personality and demonstrate the knowledge that you do have in that space as best you can, because it is impromptu. So it's impromptu not only for you, but also impromptu for the person who's conducting the interview. So just try to keep that in mind and sort of take a deep breath and go do your best.
Something to kind of add to that, because I know I personally had an impromptu interview during one of my first convention that I went to. It's a very strong possibility that it's going to happen. Like, a lot of schools take advantage of that, especially if they have the director or someone at a higher up position. They'll have them do interviews just because it's kind of like getting to do that face to face rather than a Zoom or a phone for that initial round. So almost in a way, you want to kind of not be prepared, but at least think about maybe some questions that you could potentially be asked, like, what do you think your strengths are? Like, why do you want to work in this field? Like, some simple questions to have like a general understanding of, like, if someone would have that conversation with you, like how you would respond. Obviously, you can't do the in-depth prep that you normally would for an interview, but if you have a basic understanding of how you would respond to some of those simple generic questions that 90% of us have probably answered at some point during an interview, I think it's super important to at least think about those kind of going in, just in case it does happen. You don't get completely like, oh crap, what do I say? If you have them in your mind, they're probably going to be able to, you're going to be able to vocalize those rather than having to look at them like, because ultimately you do know the answers. It's just those nerves. So if you think about them before, I think it kind of helps calm those nerves and you don't go in completely blind.
Thank you, Tyler and Katie, for giving input on that. I think it's also such a rare situation that as a young professional, you have an interview and then most likely you have your people from your team with you. So definitely sharing that you're trying to make that connection and allow people who might already have that previous connection with them to also help you while they're all at N4A as well.
So N4A is expensive and conventions are expensive. So does anyone have any advice for creative ways or ways to kind of pursue funding and some assistance for attending professional development opportunities like this?
So I don't know when these scholarship deadlines were or are, but there are usually some scholarships through N4A, maybe some other organizations or subcommittees that may have some sort of funding towards attending a conference, asking your department even. I know not always as an intern or GA that those positions are funded to go, but it never hurts to, ask your director, your supervisor, kind of how that process works, even months before the conference, if you know you want to go, so you give yourself time to plan on the front end. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add.
Also, if you're an intern or a GA, you can try to get funding through your grad program. Sometimes they have different grants or scholarships or things that you can apply to so that you can go through that method rather than getting it from your athletic department.
I think two other things also that are sometimes in-house is that if your athletic program has a travel coordinator, seeing if they can help you with your flight, because sometimes they get a much better deal than you will, and if they'll let you reimburse them. The second thing with this year's conference, having NACTA and a lot other conferences overlapping at the same time, if you're worried about going out and being the only one that you're aware of that needs a room, somebody else from your institution, whether from compliance or another part of the organization, may also be going that you've never crossed paths with. So they might be also looking for a roommate or even a Uber mate or any other form of transportation. So.
We talked a lot in the panel portion of the discussion about the concurrent sessions, those for the different tracks, learning specialist, advising, enhancement. What about keynote sessions? Are they worth it?
Yes, definitely attend keynote sessions, the beginnings, the ends. There might be a lunch one in there somewhere too. But I love attending those keynote sessions. They're usually really powerful. I always take something from those, so I definitely would not bypass those keynote sessions.
All right. Well, before we wrap up, I think maybe let's just go around to each of the panelists and have them share a favorite convention memory or something that was just a huge takeaway from a convention that they have attended in the past.
I'll go first. I definitely think attending the new member orientation was probably my favorite thing. Coincidentally enough, I was an intern when I was at Maryland when I first went to my first one, and I ended up sitting at a table with a girl who worked here at Mizzou at the time, and then 2 days later, I ended up interviewing for a job at Mizzou. So like it was just a complete small world kind of coincidence type thing, which we always joke about, like, oh, remember when we were at the same table? But I also made so many friends in that short amount of time that I still am connected with and kind of keep in touch with, especially in the field, and making sure we're all kind of kept our sanity throughout COVID and such. So forming those connections, making new friends, I think was probably my favorite part of attending convention.
Yeah, I would echo Katie's point in terms of the relationships you can develop both professionally and personally and those sorts of things. Some of my good friends in the industry I met at my first N4A and continue to sort of lean on and help grow me professionally and personally and all of those different things.
Getting to present at N4A was terrifying, but also a really cool experience and something I would definitely recommend for the future. And if you're interested in presenting or think it could be something that you want to do, start thinking about it now so you give yourself plenty of time before the next convention comes around. And you also get plenty of ideas as you're going to these different panels, and all of the different sessions might spark something or an idea. And it's also really great to kind of gather people from LCEC or other groups to do it with you. So would definitely recommend that. It was hard, but it was a good experience.
And I would, looking forward to the fear of presenting, Erin, since me and Katie will be going. Chelsea, we will miss you. But I would also say that one of my favorite memories was new member orientation. Not only did I meet people that were pursuing to be a learning specialist, but advisors, people in student athlete development, and I definitely still keep those connections. And then also meeting my mentor. I was in the N4A mentor program, so actually being able to like meet my mentor in person and see them and hang out with them was also super cool.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for sharing those memories. It sounds like really just a very enriching experience. So we hope that everyone on this call, whether it's N4A or another convention, gets those types of opportunities. Please do not hesitate to reach out to any of the panelists or the moderators from today's conversation if you do have follow-up questions. Our information is in the bio on the LSU Support Summit website. So again, we are so happy to field any follow-up questions from you all. And then Christine from LSU is going to pop a survey form up on the screen if you don't mind participating and giving your feedback on today's session. But thank you to all of our panelists, and thank you to all who were able to join us today.